Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution Scriptures. We're dealing with Acts chapter 15 today, and we've been building to this chapter for about 5 or 6 chapters, seeing what's going on. This is where it's all decided. Are the Gentiles allowed in this movement? They're allowed in, but they've got to be circumcised, or they don't have to be circumcised? What are the laws? What are the rules for Gentiles, those filthy dogs from the nations, coming into this set-apart sect of the Nazarene? What's the deal with this? So today in Acts 15, it's also the time where I think a lot of the disciples meet each other. Paul hadn't met a lot of them before. Let's get into it. Acts chapter 15. Then some men came to Antioch from Judea and began teaching the Gentile believers that you can't be delivered if you're not circumcised as Moses taught us. You can't be delivered. These are believers here, but they're Jews, telling the Gentiles, no, you can't be delivered if you're not circumcised as Moses taught us. What does delivered mean, though? Has it got anything to do with being Hebrew? Paul and Barnabas were against this teaching, of course they were, and argued with these men about it. So the group decided to send Paul, Barnabas, and some others to Jerusalem to talk more about this with the other followers and elders. The fellowship helped them get ready to leave on their trip. Then the men went through the countries of Phoenicia and Samaria, where they told all about how the nations had turned to Yahuwah. This made all the believers very happy. When the men arrived in Jerusalem, the chosen followers and elders, plus the whole fellowship, welcomed them. Paul, Barnabas, and the others told them all about what Yahushua had done with them. Some of the believers in Jerusalem had belonged to the Pharisees, and they said, well, Gentile believers must be circumcised. We must tell them to obey the law of Moses. Now, for us today, we think, those wicked Jews. This was the only way that someone from the nations could ever engraft into being a Hebrew person through the covenant given to Abraham. This was how it was. They were just doing what they were told to do, and it was a ceremonial cleanness thing. You can't mix with the nations, otherwise you'll be unclean, and your Creator won't have anything to do with you. So there was a genuine fear there. So if these outsiders are going to come in to our belief, that's great, but they've got to become Hebrews first, they thought. And the only way to become a Hebrew is through the blood covenant, the old blood covenant, which was circumcision. That was the sign of the covenant. So, understand? That's where they're coming from. Of course, there were those that did know and were just lording it over the people, but a lot of them just didn't understand. So Yahushua's chosen followers and the elders gathered to discuss this matter. And after a long debate, Peter stood up and said to them, my brothers, I'm sure you remember what happened in the early days. Yahushua chose me from among you to speak the good news to those who are not Jewish. It was from me that they heard the good news and believed in the first place. Remember his vision about clean and unclean? Remember all that? And they went to Cornelius' house and they received the Spirit before they'd been immersed. Yahushua kick-started it all. It was from me that they heard the good news and believed in the first place. Yahushua knows everyone, even their thoughts, and he accepted these Gentile people, proving this to us by giving them his Spirit, the same as he did to us. So to Yahushua, those people are no different from us. And when they believed, Yahushua cleansed their hearts by belief also. So now, why are you putting this yoke? Yoke means a teaching, and it's circumcision in this case. Why are you putting this yoke on the necks of these Gentile believers? Are you trying to make Yahushua angry or something? We and our fathers weren't even able to bear that yoke ourselves. In other words, they couldn't behave the Torah properly. He's not saying there's something bad about the Torah. He's saying we couldn't even behave it properly either, and yet you want everyone else to? No, we believe that we Jews and these Gentile believers will be delivered the same way by the favor of our Master Yahushua. Now, for those who don't know what this idea of a yoke is, It's agricultural, like most things in Scripture. See this red thing that's joining the two cows together for the field or for travel? This is called a yoke. Calls them yokes it together. That's why when it talks about, Scripture talks about marriage, it says, don't be unequally yoked. You wouldn't put this thing on a small animal and a big animal, would you? You wouldn't be unequally yoked. Well, it's saying about that with marriage. Anyway, that's what a yoke is. Living Torah, Yahushua's instructions, is not a heavy yoke to bear. Quite the opposite. You don't have any real problems. Yahushua looks after you, protects you. But without Yahushua's spirit and divine heart operation, it's impossible to behave. That's why they were saying, no one even did it right back then anyway. That's why they had the sacrificial system, the daily sacrifices, because no one could do the Torah properly. The Torah was from Yahuwah though, so it must be perfect. It's mankind that can't achieve it because they didn't have the Spirit within them. When Yahushua said, come to me all you who are heavy laden and burdened, and I will give you rest. Learn from me, for my yoke is light. It wasn't the Torah yoke that was the weighing people down. It wasn't because they were in the Torah. It was the stresses of living in this world with the condition of sin, with that corruptible seed within you that's eating you away from the inside, causing you to sin and slowly killing you. The minute you're born, you're slowly dying and you're taking in all the world and the sinfulness from it. That's what causes the heavy laden and burdened. Come to me and I will give you rest. Nothing to do with throwing off the Torah yoke, nothing to do with that. Because unlike Western religion today, most of Israel never saw the Torah as a burden. This was their heritage. Abraham, being a Hebrew, Moses, 10 Commandments, this was their national identity. This is the only thing that their blood covenant made them a nation. Prior to that, they had nothing. Abraham was wandering around. Israel was slaves in Egypt. It was only Yahuwah's covenant that gave them a national sense of purpose and pride. So they never saw the Torah, the instructions, as a burden. That's what we think today in the Western religions. That's what they think out here. They never saw it as a burden, for it connected them with Yahuwah, gave them purpose, identity, and inheritance. Just like the yoke on an animal. This yoke was never meant to keep the animal, this yoke on an animal was never meant to be heavy, cruel, or inflict pain, but to keep the animal focused, connected with its master's desires in the field and the task at hand. That's what the Torah, that's what Yahushua's word does in our lives. It's not heavy, it's not laborious. It keeps us focused in the field, in the work that he wants us to do. It's like a Torah zone, a hedge of protection. You don't go out of it and you don't got no problems. Make sense? So Peter says all this about you couldn't even do the Torah properly and you want everyone else to do it. They need the Spirit and they're getting the Spirit. So stop putting all these laws on top of them. When the whole group became quiet, then the whole group became quiet listening while Paul and Let's try again. Then the whole group became quiet, listening while Paul and Barnabas told them all about the miraculous signs and wonders that Yahushua had done through them among the Gentile people. So Paul gets up then, tells them all about his travels abroad and everything that's gone on, backing up pretty much what Peter said as well, that it's for the Gentiles too. And he would know because he's been out there dealing with mainly the Gentile people. They went to the Jew first, but how did the Jews treat them in most towns and places? Ran them out of town so the Gentiles were soaking it in. And when they finished speaking, James, Yahushua's brother, said, "My brothers, listen to me. Simon Peter has told us how Yahushua showed his love for the Gentile people by raising up a portion of them in his name. And the words of the prophets agree with this too." This is where he quotes the prophet Amos. "And after this, I'll return and rebuild the tent of David that's fallen down. I'll rebuild its ruins and set it up so that a portion of mankind might seek Yahuwah, even all the nations on whom my name is called, says Yahuwah, who's doing all this. Why on earth would Yahusha, when there's been a grand temple of Solomon dedicated, and he's left it, and now there's an even grander temple there in this time, but he's not in it. Why would he want to bring back the tent of David? I asked the children about this the other night. What's significant about the tent of David? What was there before the tent of David? And they said Solomon's temple. Sorry, they said Moses' tabernacle. Moses' tabernacle. But only the priests were allowed in there. But then David brought the ark into his own tent. Tried it the first time. Someone died. Then he tried it again, did it the right way on the shoulders of the priests, put the ark in the tent. It was open for the whole nation to see that beaming, shining, radioactive light that just uplifted everybody. That was available for everybody. Everybody, that's the key word. It was available to everybody. Jews, Gentiles, foreigners, anybody who came, walked past, they could feel the presence, the love of Yahuwah. That's the significance of this tent. Because when James speaks about this, he just, case closed. Everyone understood. Oh, that's what's happening. Peter said this, Paul said this, and now James has told them why. Because that was his goal all along. The whole Hebrew movement was to spread it to the nations. They never did. So now it's being spread to the nations, and all are welcome to join in this everlasting blood covenant. But he only ever made a blood covenant with Israel. Here's Israel. So you got to come into the blood covenant. But you don't come in by circumcision. You don't come in by being a Hebrew. Being part of his Israel has nothing to do with being a Hebrew. It's coming into his new blood covenant. So that's what the significance of the tent of David was. The praise tent, where all the nations could share in this joy. And this is where David set up all the patterns, the sacrifice and the praise that was institutionalized into Solomon's temple. So see the significance there? He's raising back up this tent that all the nations can have. Yes, all this has been known from the beginning of time. So we shouldn't make things hard for those who have turned to Yahusha from among the Gentile nations. Instead, we should write to them telling them, now that you've been washed clean, don't get defiled by idolatry. Don't be involved in sexual sins, fornication, whoring, immorality. Don't eat meat from animals that have been strangled. Don't eat or drink any blood. Interestingly, these 4 things, all these practices were promoted by the pagan temples, by the deities and societies, and directly instructed against in Leviticus 17. Remember when we went through that? So all these things were how the heathens worshipped. It's how they worshipped primarily revolving around the temple, the deities, the sacrifices, blood sacrifice, drinking blood, sodomizing, temple prostitution, everything. All these things were wrapped up in the temple, pagan temple worship, and Yahusha hates it. They shouldn't do any of these things because there are still men in every city who teach the law of Moses. In fact, the words of Moses have been read in the synagogue every Shabbat for many years now. So there's no excuse. No excuse to not know what the law is. So what's he saying there? He's not saying don't do the law, is he? He's saying don't put heavy things on new people coming in. So Yahusha's chosen followers, elders, and the whole fellowship wanted to send some men with Paul and Barnabas to Antioch. The group decided to choose some of their own men too. Judas, called Barsabbas, and Silas. They were respected men. The group sent this new letter with the men, which said, from Yahusha's chosen followers and elders, your brothers, to all the Gentile brothers in the cities of Antioch and the countries of Syria and Cilicia. Dear brothers, we've heard that some men have come to you from our group, and what they said has troubled and upset you. Just know we didn't tell them to do this. So now we've all agreed to choose some men and send them to you. They are our dear friends Barnabas and Paul, who have given their lives to serve our Master Yahushua Messiah. So we have sent Judas and Silas with them also, who will tell you the same things. Now that you have been cleansed by Yahushua's Spirit, we agree with him, and you should have no more burdens. That's it, no more burdens. Except for the necessary things. There are necessary things. Stay away from food that's been offered to idols, or meat from animals that have been strangled, or from blood. And don't be involved in sexual sin, fornication, whoring. For if you stay away from these, you will do very well. Now we say goodbye, so be strong. That's very interesting. So he's telling them not to put burdens on them. Clearly circumcision is a burden. But he is telling them not to eat things that are unclean, not to drink blood. Does that give you a sense of priority to Yahushua? What you put in your body is important. You're not to put things in your body that he declares is not food. That's nothing to do with old covenants, old whatever. That's just Yahushua created certain things, not food. And the life has the blood in it. You don't drink blood. That's an abomination. There's only a handful of things that Yahushua considers an abomination. And drinking blood is one of them. If you stay away from these, you will do very well. Now we say goodbye, so be strong. So Paul, Barnabas, Judas, and Silas left Jerusalem and went to Antioch. There they gathered the group of believers together and gave them the letter. When the believers read it, understandably, they were so happy, for the letter comforted them greatly. They had no more of these burdens from the Jews on them. Judas and Silas, who were also prophets, and said many things to encourage the believers and make them stronger in their belief. And after Judas and Silas stayed there for a while, they left, for they had received a blessing of peace from the other believers. So they went back to those who had sent them. But Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch, teaching the believers and telling others of the good news about Yahushua. He's getting around, isn't he? Look at these journeys. This is where it all started. This is mainly Paul doing all this. Paul and Silas, Paul and Barnabas. Look at them going around. A lot of these places are the letters that John wrote in the Revelation. Thessalonian. A few days later, Paul said to Barnabas, we should go back to all the towns where we told people the message of Yahushua. We should visit them, see how they're doing. That's nice. Barnabas wanted to bring John Mark with them too, but on their first trip, John Mark did not continue with them in the work, but had left them at Pamphylia. Paul didn't think it was a good idea to take him this time, so there were sharp feelings between Paul and Barnabas. So intense, sharp feelings, so intense that they separated and went different ways. Didn't stop spreading the word though, did they? Just didn't want to be around each other for a while. Didn't agree. One of them wanted to take Mark and give him another go, and one of them, Paul, was a bit gung-ho, wanted to go for it. Don't have time for this tag along if he's going to ditch us and run. Barnabas sailed to Cyprus and took Mark with him. Paul chose Silas to go with him. The believers in Antioch put Paul into Yahushua's care and sent him out. Then Paul and Silas went through the countries of Syria and Cilicia, helping the fellowships grow stronger. So we see, brothers and sisters, that when we come into the movement, there are still things in our flesh. There are still carpetbaggers. There are still movements. There are still friends, family, things Yahushua wants to rid us of, aren't there? He doesn't want us burdened down, clogged up with things. Because why? We are the living temple. He's dedicated us in our immersion. We come out of the water fresh and clean. He doesn't care whether we're circumcised or not, because he's doing a divine heart operation. The circumcision is no longer of our flesh, it's of our heart. Circumcise, it takes it out. Divine heart operation, throws it away, dead. And with it, the corrupt, evil seed that it was born with, decaying filth, throws it away. That's what you leave at the bottom of the water. You come up fresh, new, with a clean heart, a new spirit, which is a new essence, inclination, nature. And you start reading and filling yourself. He writes his word on your heart. And you have his presence. You have a portion of his seed, incorruptible seed within you. And that gives you the life. That starts burning you from the inside out, training you, Hebrews 12, to bring forth fruit, gifts, works for you to do. just like these disciples were doing, bearing good fruits and spreading the word, giving people the offer of deliverance. That's the whole purpose of you being immersed. So, love you, brothers and sisters. We will be back next week with Acts chapter 16. See you later.
Hit it. What does it take? Stop me making the same mistake. Now I see it's not me. What a fool I've been. Talk about my love, talk about my living, and I know that's not enough. I just want my freedom, I just want to love.